Hi, welcome to the fifth in our series on growing a healthy volunteer culture. It's great to be with you. Hope that the last session, I hope you really enjoyed it as we thought about choosing with care, getting the right people in the right seats as we head in our destination to lead volunteers in our ministry. This is the fifth out of sixth session. Today we are looking at investing with diligence. And diligence means that we're doing so carefully, deliberately, conscientiously, if you like. How do we equip our volunteers for maximum effectiveness? This is what we're talking about. We want to equip, we want to invest in our volunteers. And I think the first question to ask is probably quite reasonable, and it's why should we do this? Why is it that we are looking to place a big priority on investing in people? And of course, really, we're going back to some of our original principles that we want to see people grow into the likeness of Christ. We want them to do the works that God has prepared in advance for them to do. We want them to love God and to love neighbor. We want them to fulfill the Great Commission of making disciples. And there's many more things we could say, but that's going back to our first session. We're dealing with people, and we've got to remember both internal and external goals. We're heading externally in a direction. We're looking to see our mission fulfill what we've set out for it to do. But also we have the goal of investing in our volunteers to see God work in them as well. And some of the examples we've got there we've looked at across the last few sessions of our course is how we want to see people be valued beyond what they accomplish. That's very true, isn't it? We don't just value people for what they do, but we very much value people for who they are. We also know that people stewardship is key to building the kingdom. It's not just about financial stewardship, it is about people. We know that we're here to serve Jesus together. We looked at those models where we can have, on the one hand, a helper approach, where we just say, come and help me in my ministry. Or we have the spectator approach, where people just watch. No, our role is to see people as basically the priesthood of all believers, to invest in them so that they can minister. We can multiply what God's doing through us, through our ministry. And of course, we pay volunteers in non-financial currencies. Investing in people is part of that. So that's the kind of the internal goals, but the external goals are also there, aren't they? And they're really important. If we're wanting to do things and we're giving our volunteers a role, and we've crafted this nice role description as we've talked about, and we've selected them, actually, they might be asking us, what do I need to do this role? It's really important that we're thinking, what do they need? How can I actually help them to do what I've asked them to do? There's nothing more challenging than when you've been asked to do something, but you haven't got the tools. I mean, I'm in that situation in my medical work at the minute. I've been asked to do something, but I haven't got the resources to do it. And it's incredibly frustrating. And then we also need to keep aligning people, don't we, to the kingdom. We talked about aligning them to us, to our ministry, and to the kingdom of God. And actually, when we invest in people, what we're wanting to do is invest in them so that they, not just for our ministry, but as a wider gift to what God's doing. And that actually, as we invest in them, that their role in their families, their churches, their workplaces, other kind of volunteer things that they get involved in, both now and in years to come, that we will have generously invested in people for the glory of God. And so I hope it's clear that actually our investment in our volunteers is absolutely crucial. But before we move on, I just want to clear up something about equipping happening in church and outside church. And I say clear up, we're not going to clear it up, are we? Because this can be a real debate, certainly here in the UK. Leading volunteers, I believe, is about making disciples. It's about, as we said, the Great Commission, to teach people to make disciples, teaching them to obey all that Jesus has commanded. But what about the church? Are we the church? If we're in parachurch ministry, and some of you are here because you're thinking about, how do I lead volunteers in church? But many people are thinking, how do I lead volunteers outside of the gathered local church, if you like. So my ministry, Christian Medical Fellowship, is very much like that. We are not the local church. And we have these discussions quite often. And what I say to people in response to when they say, should you really be doing discipleship, when it's not the church? And I say, well, on one hand, we are the church, okay? But bear with me on this. We are the church. We are an expression of the church in our workplaces. We are called, I believe, as believers to do things like speak the truth to one another, that actually those pastoral epistles, yes, written to local churches, are very relevant for gatherings of believers and how we our conduct with one another in our workplaces and elsewhere. You look at Ephesians 4:17-32, it's huge examples, any pastoral epistle. And we are a diverse group of people. And actually what's very powerful about being Christians in the workplace, about being Christians in parachurch ministries, often that we're coming together across denominational lines, and it helps us sometimes to focus on keeping the main thing, demonstration, proclamation of the gospel. And so actually, I think it's a powerful witness. So in many ways, we are an extension of the local church. But of course, we aren't the church as well. And I'm very clear with people about this. At CMF, we are not the church. We're not particularly intergenerational. We don't have all those sort of relationships of father, mother, brother, sister relationship in the same way at church. We don't practice the sacraments, the Lord's Supper and baptism. We're not led by elders. We don't practice church discipline. And so it's really important when we start talking about bringing people together, equipping them, training them, that we're really clear that this isn't about trying to take the place of the local church. And I always say to people, do not do this ministry with CMF at the expense of your local church. Just because you're in a group or a team here does not mean that you shouldn't be in your local church. And I try and work very closely with churches, and I often am reassuring churches about what we're doing. So for example, when we did the choosing with care and the selection process, I will phone referees, and generally there's a church leader involved, because I want to share what we're doing. I want to reassure them that actually we're here to work together. This is why we often go and speak in churches. It's why we seek to resource churches, because we're saying we want to partner with you to reach our workplaces. And every single volunteer that I have, I'll say, be rooted in a local church. Make sure that your accountability, that you are sitting under God's word, being taught faithfully, and so on. So that's really key. It also means we need to be sensitive about how we run things. I remember one group in our ministry as CMF, someone started to pray in tongues, and that was just very normal for them to do as part of their church expression. But there were some others in that meeting who felt very uncomfortable, and it led to some interesting discussions about tongues, as you can probably imagine. But I think I just want to encourage us, and it means being sensitive. It means keeping, I guess, the main thing. It means seeking to keep that unity in the bond of love, as per John 17:23, and I think that's what we want, isn't it? That unity, so that the world would see and they would know that we've been sent, and that we've been loved even as we have loved Christ. So that's just a quick note on the church. My question to you is really to pause and consider this, and to bring to our discussions, how do you approach that question of church and parachurch ministries in your context? What are some of the challenges you faced, and what opportunities are there to work alongside local and national churches? So there we go. I hope that we can agree, however, that actually we have a role in discipling people. We have a role in sort of investing in them. Okay, so we get that, the why invest in people. Hopefully that is so we're kind of agreed on that. The next thing is what are we to be sowing into people? What is it that we're meant to be sowing into people during this time? So firstly, I want to say we want a Bible-based approach. We believe that God's word is authoritative in every matter of faith and conduct, and that God's word shapes our disciple-making endeavors, and it shapes the conduct of our teams. So when we think about what we're investing, we want to be really clear that we want to be Bible-based. We want to go right to the source, God's word itself. And that's really on our heart here at CMF. So what are we investing in people? What do they need? And the way that I think about this, I split it into these three parts: head, heart, and hands. Okay, so head is what I might call knowledge. Heart is attitudes, is the way people think about things, and hands are about skills, about practical skills. So when we think about head and that knowledge, I think about that in two ways. I think about information and resources. What information do they need? Okay, that might just be things like, what's the culture of how we do things? And culture basically means how we do things around here. Okay, we all have a culture. We all have a way of doing things. It's so helpful just to help people understand the way we do things. The values, what are our values? What do we value and hold up? Just practical things. Who do I contact if I need to speak to someone about this or that? Have I done my volunteer training? That kind of thing. Okay, so some information, but then there's also resources. People need resources. They may need access to a computer. They may need to know where a certain policy is stored online. They may need access to that vision casting PowerPoint that we thought about back in session 3. So we need to be giving people the information and the resources. So it's important to think about any role you've got. What information, what resources does this person need? But as well as the head knowledge, and that's the thing that often we think about first, what does this person need? And we can, of course, ask our volunteers, as we looked at a couple of sessions back, that we actually ask people what they need from us, which is quite a thought-provoking question. What is it about their heart? What sort of attitude do we want people to have? What sort of heart attitudes are we investing in people? And there's certain things that I want to see in my people. We've looked at that all the way back at the beginning, as we think back to the heart of a volunteer. And I encourage you, go back over that material. What sort of things do we want to see invested? How might you invest that kind of sense of sacrificial, privileged service in your people? And it goes back to character as well. What sort of character are we looking for? I'm looking to invest in people and encourage a teachability, a humility, and so on. So it all needs to be very relational, and we need to think quite carefully, how do we teach and invest in people those heart attitudes, which are much more difficult, aren't they, to invest in people, those things, than they are the knowledge sometimes, because it's about whole character and change. That's a challenge. And then thirdly, what are the skills? And these might be certain training sessions that they need to attend to obtain certain skills. It might be certain video or online resources. And I would say to you, for every role that you have, and hopefully as you've worked through this process, you certainly perhaps for your own volunteer role, but also for some key other volunteer roles, and please do this, at least for one other one, is to translate that cause, is to write out what some sort of role description would look like. But what I'd like you to do is underneath there, underneath that translating the course exercises, write down your head and your heart and your hands. Write down the needs in each area. What for this role? What knowledge does this person need? For this role, what attitudes does this person need? For this role, what skills does this person need? And start to consider whether the needs in that role are being met. The training needs, if you like, for that person. So we thought about why we're investing in people. I think that's just a little glimpse of kind of what we're investing in people. I'd love to hear more from you when we speak live as to what else you might suggest. There could be many other things, I'm sure. And then we need to be thinking, where and when does investing happen? Where and when does it happen? And the main thing I really want to say here is it is relationship centered. It must be relational. If it's all at arm's length, if it's all webinars, if it's all just go and listen to this, listen to that, or watch these videos or do that course, then we're missing out. It needs to be relational. And I'm going to pause there because actually in session 6, our last session, we're going to actually be thinking a little bit more about how we relationally work with our leader volunteers and seek to multiply what we do. So that will be in session 6. Now in CMF, I've mentioned our catalyst teams before. These are teams where we're looking to do ministry through a series of volunteer teams around the UK. We're looking to have between probably around 30 of those teams, each of them led by a team leader. And each team has various roles that we're looking to support and invest in. And my role is to invest in the team leaders, who in turn invest in the teams. And this is, again, what we'll talk about next time when we think about multiplying leadership. And that's how we've set this up. So we want our equipping and our training to be relational, but there are 3 main ways that we deliver, if you like, this training, the 3 contexts. The first thing we say to people is, come and be part of a team with a vision. Okay, come and be part of that local team. So that's one context. Second context is, we will resource you as well as in that team through the office, through the central CMF organization. And if you're involved in the CMFs, that might be similar for you. It might be that you relate primarily to ICMDA and get support from the ICMDA office and the training and things that they offer. That's the second one. And the third is support from being linked with like-minded others around the country. So somebody who's in a role focusing on global issues will be in one area of the UK, can then link up with people who are working on global issues in other parts of the UK. You get the picture? So people who are focusing on different things, students, juniors, nurses, and so on. So these are the three areas. Here's a bit more information about how we do this. So in our teams, this happens in regular team meetings. Okay, so we build equipping into these meetings. I'll show you some examples of that in just a minute. We also have some equipping happening one-to-one, life on life. It's about relationships. The idea of these being local teams is that they're local enough for people to rub shoulders, to get to know one another, to know where the churches are, to know when people move in and out of the region, to know when people are struggling, etc., etc. It's about sewing into each other one-to-one. It's that kind of ministry we see as Paul speaks about his ministry, 1 Corinthians 11 verse 1. He imitates Christ, and so in the same way he wants them to imitate him, and so on. So that's the sort of regular local team gatherings that we have through our Catalyst teams. You've also then got the centre, so we have a facilitator for each role. For me, certainly leading our team leaders, that includes an annual appraisal, and we'll cover a bit more of that in our final session as well. There's also specific conferences and training. So, for example, some people attend the European Leadership Forum. There's the regular ICMDA webinars and courses. There's leadership-specific ministry days that are run by other partner organisations. There's been some coaching training that's been run recently by ICMDA, and so on. Things that are generally bigger, require more organisation, that come from the centre. And then thirdly, online. So videos, and in the future, learning modules. And I'll be sharing with you, if you're on one of these courses, some of those videos that you can have a look at and just see some of the things that we do. So those are some things from the centre. And then being linked with like-minded others. Remember I mentioned linking of someone involved in global ministry with people in other areas, also with the same heart and passion. And the idea is that we link people up with one another. And that happens at our conferences, at our annual Catalyst team training conferences. It happens in writing as we produce role descriptions, role-specific information, resources for each role that can be shared and trained around these groups, and webinars. So we have a termly webinar for each of our team roles, and other training as necessary. So that's the way I think about where this training happens for Catalyst teams for those roles. We have other volunteer roles where it works a bit differently. So this isn't prescriptive. This isn't something that you should go away and do. It's just an example to help us to think, from where are we doing that training and what's most suited to what role. It might be a bit different. And as I say, I've shared some of our booklets and links to some of our online training that we use in CMF. If you're doing the course that we've run as part of these videos. And I'm also happy to speak with you more outside if you'd like to know anything more, but also to have the opportunity actually in our time together to share what training that you use, what your volunteers use in your context. I'd love to know more. I'd love for us to be able to share ideas and best practice. Certainly, I do not have a monopoly on them, and I'm always looking for more things to do it better than we currently do. So why don't you just pause and just take a moment to write down where you train your volunteers. Is there one area that's mentioned above that you say, well, actually all of our training goes through the centre, or all of it happens locally, or perhaps you've got a new suggestion, something you'd like to take forward after doing this course. So that's where and when. And I thought I'd just give you a little case study, as I mentioned, about this local team equipping, what happens locally and how we're just equipping, an everyday volunteer who's come along and volunteered, let's say to represent CMF in a global role, or to represent CMF in serving students. Now, these are all volunteer roles. People aren't taking lots of time out of their training or out of their career to do this. They're generally doing what many of us do, what many people in your settings will do. They're investing their time and energy in a certain area of the ministry. And we want to get them together And this was happening face to face before COVID. It's now happening more online, but actually to spend time together as a team, to grow as a team, to hit those internal and external goals, if you like, of where they're going. So a rough schedule might look like there's prayer, some Bible devotion, and then actually specifically some teaching to actually integrate into a business meeting some opportunity to learn and to grow around specific issues. And I usually provide some ideas to people about what they might do, but generally I do want the team leaders perhaps to take some training that they've done with us as a team leadership group and share it, or give them some free rein to say, how is it you think you can best train your people? And obviously I'm available to help if that's needed. We then get them to review their team goals and their individual goals and to set some new goals as a team. And this is just a bit of a template, but the point is the teaching that we want them to include, and that it's based in the Bible, and some of that will be through doing Bible studies, but some of it will then be, whether it's pure Bible study or using other materials as well, focused a bit on the ministry and how we apply that teaching to the ministry that we're doing. So that might be what happens there. We also encourage certain questions. We have 4 aims at CMF: evangelism, discipleship, mission, and Christian values. So just getting them to apply those aims and saying, well, what do we want evangelism to look like in our region? And encouraging people to say, yeah, this is the central vision, but actually we might then adapt our methods at a local level to see those achieved. And I think that those are quite powerful questions and just helpful tools that people can think about what that looks like. I think another thing I wanted to just share was an idea that, so this is from Ray Evans, who's a pastor here in the UK, works with the Fellowship of Independent Evangelical Churches, is what we call the care plans. This is an alternative way, I suppose, to structure meetings and to help, I guess, equip people and train people as they work through their meetings. So we did a bit of training on this, and I'm always offering these things. I'm not saying we have to do this way in CMF. I'm offering it as a tool. So the care plan, CARE, spelling care, clarifying the mission, reminding people of the big picture. We've talked about that, haven't we, with leading with vision. Do you know what? It's not enough just to stop after we've got people on board. We have to keep leading with vision. So as we're investing in people, lead with the vision. Keep it focused in prayer and on the Bible, but actually teach people to think about the bigger picture. Teach them to long for the endless, endless sea, rather than focusing on the boats. Agree on goals. So talk about the goals. This is where we start to say, let's get precise, let's get accountable, let's encourage one another. Review progress. So actually normalizing review, normalizing, and I call a lot of this peer pressure. So actually getting people together in teams, it means that actually I'm not having to do a lot of the work to drive people to do things. It normalizes a culture where we say, what do we do? How can we do it better? And we review that. And help each other. We hold each other accountable, but in a way which hopefully is encouraging and life-giving. And then equipping people. And this is the big E that we're talking about really here, or investing in people. How can we invest in them so that the team gets better? And that's what we did on that last slide, where I talked about a potential order, an alternative order really. How can we discuss these things? Can we read a book? Can we be thinking through something that's particularly applicable in our time and our context? And I think it possibly doesn't matter so much what you do, although do something that's kind of good quality, but it doesn't always matter what you do. The fact that you are investing in people, the fact that you are actually making this part of the culture, that you're showing you're interested in them, and that you're growing together as a group perhaps, is really powerful and something I often get good feedback on. And then I've found these some very helpful questions, very helpful things just to share. And again, I think these originally came in a slightly different format from the Newell training, which again I would really recommend to you to do as a much more comprehensive way of thinking about all these things. But investing in your team, and these are just ways we can do that. And these are things that I keep on my wall actually, and think, how do I encourage my team leaders and others that I work with? So encouraging their spiritual growth. Just think about, how can I encourage them in their day-to-day walk with God? How can I pray for them regularly? Are they in my diary to be praying for regularly? Am I aware of things going on in their family, in their life, that I can be asking God for? I just had a message this week from one of my team leaders in fact, just yesterday, who's really, I didn't know this, but really struggling with a particular case at work. And I can pray into that alongside him. What a great joy that is. How can I increase engagement? How can I meet with them? How can I help them to be engaged in the big picture? So often in our regions, people get very focused on what they're doing, where they are. I want to keep reminding them of the big picture. I want to remind them where we're heading. I want to remind them of the impact that they're having on the big picture. So increasing their engagement with our organization and with what God's doing. Increasing their skills. So that's, again, how can I actually upskill them with their training, particularly? How can I help them to grow? And then how can I encourage, I guess, influence? I want to encourage them to be influencers. I want to align them with CMF and not just myself. I want to think about how I celebrate and thank them. So I think those are really, I found really helpful ways. And of course, just covered in prayer. The biggest investment really we can do is to pray for people and to walk alongside them. But I found those ideas helpful just on a day-to-day level. And session 6 will give us a lot more ways of investing in our volunteers, really, with a particular focus on how we multiply our leader volunteers. So there's more to come when it comes to investing from that perspective. So I hope that's been helpful. It's really a bit of an introduction, and I'm sure there's a huge amount more we could cover. But I think the key is that we do seek to invest in people. There's good reason to do it. There are certainly places we can do it. We can be more creative in doing it. I'm sure I can. I'm not the most creative kind of person, as you can probably tell from my slides. I find creativity difficult, so I need people around me who are helping me to be more creative in how we do that. And so really some key takeaways, as leaders of volunteers, we must invest in them to reach our internal and external destinations. And while we might not be the gathered local church, we have a role in discipling others in partnership with the local church. We need to identify what we are investing in people. And for us, we think about that through a head, heart, and hands approach. And we must consider where investing takes place. Where does it happen? And keeping it grounded in relationship at all levels. And then we can use specific tools to train leaders and invest in others. And we can consider relevant partnerships to aid with this. I've already mentioned ICMDA when it comes to our sort of global healthcare setting. There are many people that ICMDA partners with, organizations, groups, for us to learn from and to grow in. And I've just thoroughly encouraged us to be looking out for those partnerships. And then I'm not going to read through these. There are 4 questions for us to consider for our session together. I really look forward to sharing with you. I really look forward to catching up and hearing all that God is doing in and through you as we seek to invest in volunteers for the glory of God and for the extension of his kingdom.